Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about adding on to our blemishes and dodge and burn technique that we've learned about um, skin and retouching and beauty retouching. Now we're going to add on to this by actually looking at changing the background and to a different color and how to work with the selection process for that. So here we have my file. You can see I already have my background layer, again a copy of it just in case something happens. I do have the work already pre-done, but I want to walk you through the steps a little bit. But it really requires more attention to detail that we talk about. So in this case, first we're going to talk about changing the, or actually selecting the background. We'll select the background first. So oftentimes I like to highlight that layer there, and then we're going to go over here to select and color range. This is one of the easier ones to work with because of the fact it's a solid background. Something to think about is that so the color range is kind of a sampling. We can start off with a sample. I'll start off with this sample up here first, and the white is what's going to be selected, and the black is what's going to be again, back to the black and white to the foreground background color of our mask. I would also click on the add to this. This is where you can add to the selection. So if I want to this one here, it may work my way down a little bit. If you remember, this is an image that has a gradation. So it goes from like light gray to dark gray. So I'm just kind of adding to that sample a little bit. If you look closely, you can see that there's some little parts where it's not selected. That is part of the gray area, which is being selected, and parts of it was not being selected. So I want to add that as much as possible. What you can also do to help this a little bit is, oh, by the way, I changed this preview to gray selection. You might see it in this modality. You'll only see it here, but I like to actually change it to grayscale. So that way I can kind of see the difference between what is being selected and what's not being selected. You can see some of the gray parts in her hair or her eyes or the sweater is not selected or not fully masked out, probably because of the fact that all colors have some elements of other colors, and so this is very reminiscent of that selection of the gray background. You can increase the fuzziness to see less stuff. So you can see there's more gray in her skin, or you can decrease it to be almost near black, but then you see that some of the background is coming back in here as well. Now what you want to watch out for is the fringes on the hair. You see where the hair is, hair is basically a pixel. You don't want to get too rough like this, but you don't want to get too soft like that, because then you have to have that balance between the selection. So I might kind of come back in over here a little bit. That's a little rough for me. I might leave it right around there or so, just to kind of give it a general range, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this a little bit later. So I'm going to say okay. There's your selection. You can see that it does include parts of the sweater and not parts of that. Again, this is where this is what we've selected, but we actually want that's what's going to ultimately change. So I would probably switch that over to invert that real quick, and you can just you have your selection tool. You can say select inverse. So now this is the part that's going to be selected here. You can see some of the hair is kind of tweaking out. That's only because of the fact that that gray area that you have on the background is very reminiscent of the gray area that's in the hair. I can create the mask now, and so now I have this mask, and I have again some of the parts of that hair there, but it's not a complete mask at this moment. So a couple ways to think about fixing this mask to make it more complete. Yes, we can go through the channels and do that. You can see where the mask is not fully the foreground or background color, but I want to show you a different way today that may be a little bit more easier, and that is to come in here and So what we can do in this case, in order to help us, is create a background layer. And to create a background with a different color, that's a fairly straightforward kind of process. So I would just add a layer. Now remember, the background layer it has to be behind the subject. So if I were to create the color on top of this, you would actually be on front. So I'm just going to go ahead and create the color and just kind of show you that. Again, working with our layers is very important, and understanding what they can do. So I'm going to say just add a solid color, and then my color I want to pick it to be a nice little lavender, I guess, right around here. And you can see that the background layer is not in the proper place. It needs to be underneath, so I'm going to tuck that underneath behind the subject. And now you see that the image is coming through. And the nice part is that you still have some of those elements where the background comes in between the hair. But if you also notice, some of the elements of that hair is really frayed. And we want to soften that up a little bit so it doesn't look as harsh, so it kind of blends in more naturally. So I would come back here to the layer, alright. So at this point, here we have our image, and I'm going to change this into the mask layer so I can get to see that. That's pressing down the Alt the Alt key on your keyboard, and so that becomes now the black and white process. And you can now you can really see where some of the mask is left, where it's blank, and this is actually where I will want to change that. So you can see some of the eyes or the earrings will be actually transparent or see-through. I take the brush tool, and again, using the foreground background, I need to paint this on white. This is where I would actually change the flow to 100, so everything's all maxed out, so it's going to be either white or black. And you can see that I can make that a little bit bigger. Whoop, too big. Maybe a little bit harder. And I just go in there and make that mask to be either black or white. I'm not going to do the edges just yet because that takes a little bit more time and conscious to work on that a little bit, but I'm just going to do this right here for right now. And that just cleans up the mask. We want a nice clean mask to be black or white. Again, I'm just going to stick to the middle parts here. Again, you take a bigger one here and kind of go over this. Oops, you see how I went over this little area between her elbow and arm? A nifty trick here is to actually go over to the mode, change that to overlay. And what's going to happen is that it's only going to do, you can either do the black or the white, but the mask is going to be the boundary. And so if I take this big one again and I come over here and I'm just going to paint right on top of it, it does not do anything to it, but I can add over here to that white area very easily, but I'm not painting. You can see I'm painting a little bit of it, but it restricts it as much as possible. But again, I probably would not come in with that big of a brush. And if you take off the overlay, and I would probably just be a little more careful like this, so it just goes a little bit quicker. So I want to stop here because I want to keep going to the next demo, but ultimately I would do the same on the black side. You can see there's a little, if you look very closely, there's little bits of white. I would switch that and be able to make that solid all the way in. Again, the overlay is very helpful in order to make sure you don't cross the boundaries. See, I'm trying to paint black over here in this white area, it doesn't work. But I would make that mask a little tighter, but I'm also fraying out my hair a little bit. So again, I don't want to get too close to the hair just yet, because I'll do something different for that. Again, all back into details. So I want to leave that for right there, so that way we kind of work with that. Again, hit your Alt key and then click your mask to turn off the black and white of that mask. Now, this is where we're going to get a little bit more nitty gritty and detailed. You can see, if you look really closely, you can see there's that purple right there, and that's just a transparent part of the hair. again, I would come back over here and then clean that up so that way we don't see the purple coming through our hair, because that would be unnatural. But again, this is one of those things that takes time to kind of look through inch by inch of the image, but I'm not going to use the entire demo for that. So here we are. We're going to fix the edges of the fringes of the hair a little bit. I'm going to create a new layer. And if you remember back to the blemishes and the dodging and burning that we did, you had all these empty layers on here, and which again you're going to use the sample below the image to bring it back up and to apply it to this file or this layer right here. This is a way, again, non-destructive way of not destroying the actual original image, but giving yourself an opportunity to kind of add to it as well. But in this case, we're going to do something a little special. We're going to actually, you remember how these layers are kind of linked to each other because the mask and the image are linked to each other. We're going to link the top layer with the bottom layer, what's called a clipping mask. It's basically a top-down version of working with the layers. We're going to say you're going to hold down the Alt key, and then, whoops, you're going to hover your mouse somewhere just right in between the two layers, and you see the little down arrow. It says layer, attach it to the down layer, and then you see the layer 3 move over just a little bit. So here's before, and then hover above or between the two layers, and then hold down your Alt key, and then click over. So now this layer is going to be working with this layer down here. All right. I would also like to go ahead and name this because it helps in kind of naming your layers. And this layer I'm going to just name, say, the brush layer. So that way I know I'm using just the brush on this layer. We're going to create another clipping mask above the brush layer to kind of work with to further enhance the hair. But this one is going to be the brush. So in this case, I have my brush out. And one thing you want to verify is your eyedropper tool. And first you go to your eyedropper tool, that your sample size is going to be not point sample, but 3 by 3 average. And what this is that it's three squares in both the X and Y coordinates, and that will be an average that will apply to your paintbrush. So basically it's not just 1 pixel, it's actually 9 pixels, and the average of those colors will be what will be applied to your paintbrush sample. So make sure it's 3 by 3, and then go back to my brush tool, and then if I were to again hold down the Alt key, it will take a 3 by 3 pixel sample of wherever I point it. In this case I want to point it over here to the hair, maybe that dark part, and then take a brush, maybe a little bit small. You don't want to go too overboard with this. And you can see that I'm kind of painting on top of that, and it's painting 100%. This is where I would turn down the flow to about maybe 2%, maybe 10%. Let's try, I'll just accelerate this a little bit. And then what I'm doing, that's a little too much, is just kind of painting some of that edges back. Let's make it 8. And I'm kind of filling in those edges just a little bit. And this is really just on the fringe part. That's a little too much. I want to crank it down to about 5 now. And it just kind of gives a little bit more definition to those frays and those flyaways. But again, you can still see through. It brings back some of those flyaways. I'll deal with that just a little bit. Again, you want some of the flyaways, but you don't want all of them. But you want some that realism. Otherwise, if it's just one smoothness around the hair, it becomes very like helmet-like and unreal. So there's that one there. And again, having that colorful background kind of gives you that that look, and that you can still see through it all. And now I'm going to add on the layer that we're going to use to kind of fill in some of the gaps that are not here. So for instance, I want to again add another layer, and again I'm going to link it or clipping mask it to the layers below it, and that's just basically again hovering right between the two layers, holding down your Alt key, and then adding it. So now you can see it going downwards. In this case, I'm going to take the clone stamp tool. This is probably a great use of this tool is trying to figure out where it's going, how it's going to fill in some of these gaps. So for instance, I want to take a sample over here, and again, you want to make sure the sample is current and below, not just the current layer, because there's nothing on this layer. You want to make sure it's the one below it. I want to take it right about here, and I'm just going to fill it in just a little bit. If you look, before, after, before, after. Again, I might crank down that the flow just a little bit so that's not so hard. Okay. And it's just, you know, kind of dancing it back in there little by little. You can see like those hair just came back in just a little bit. Alright, so a little bit better. Again, I'm accelerating I'm missing some steps, but again, you want to go through, you know, all the parts of the hair. You can see it's great to have that purpleness, that purple kind of come through. And I want to show you what to do with these hairs over here, because they're still fried out. But what you're also adding to it is that you're adding a little bit more, you know, darkness to it, so that way it's not just that it's just you know, you see more of the hair, especially the finer, more white hair than the dark gray hair. So let's look at it before and after real quick. So there's you know, 20 steps back. Now you have that little add-on there. Again, 20 steps back. Okay. And then the next thing you would probably want to start thinking about, and this is going to be switching back between 3 different layers between the, I want to name this one here, the clone layer. So we have a clone layer, the brush layer, and then the mask. So going back into the mask, what I would sometimes do in this case is make sure the mask is selected, and to fix those really other parts of the you know, real fringed out part, or the ones that are kind of floating out of there in the middle of nowhere, is use the blur tool. And again, I'm just going to blur the mask so it kind of hides it a little bit. This is also a great way to take care of some of those edges. Maybe a little too much. You can change the strength of the blur by going up here to strength. You can see 100%. That's a lot. And then you might want to, you know, again, this is an experimentation of what works best. I find that going small to a smaller number, adding on to that as you go along, is a more effective than trying to do it all at one time. And this is where you want to stay on the outside of the mask. You don't want to go over here in the middle of the mask. You want to just stay on the edges and the fringes of it, like that one there. And this is in a very like down and quick way to kind of like feather the edges. Basically, you're just blurring the edges a little bit. Okay. All right. So there you have, you know, this kind of process again to kind of remove the background, replace the background, and then start touching up the edges, particularly the hair. And again, I would come through here, and you can see that there's a faint line there. Again, there's different ways to kind of adjust that mask. Maybe I'll just kind of blur it a little bit and see if I can get that here. But again, if you're going back and forth between one layer or the other, you have to make sure you're in the layer. So if I want to Again, brush this layer out a little bit more. Go back to the paintbrush and collect that sample. You can see the colors kind of coming into those edges a little bit, so they'll be a little bit more recognizable. And then, you know, maybe come back into the mask layer and go for the blur tool. Kind of soften that edge just a little bit. I'm using a big blur tool, so maybe a little bit smaller. Oops, too small. All right. Let me show you the before and after of what I did on another project beforehand. I want to turn all those, actually, I want to turn all those on, and I want to stick that into a folder real quick. And organize your stuff. So this is what I did beforehand. I did it on a darker background because I can get that. Again, it's a little choppy, but again, you kind of work through it a little bit. But just kind of look at the overall of this. So here's the blemish work that I did. You know, lighten it up a little bit more. It's a little bit more open over here. And the dodging the burning to fix some of the wrinkles a little bit, to soften them up a little bit. And then, and then there's the kind of work. You can see it kind of got rid of that flyaway with that masking process. But again, it's all about practice. I think this is the better one. You know, but again, it's all about practice. You know, I did it once just for demo, and then I did it again just for the recording. And you can see that this one's actually a little bit more cleaner. And again, it's really working with that selection tool, the color selection tool, to kind of give you that more accuracy. But again, you're going to go through and then fine tune that mask. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thanks.